The Chinook helicopter descended through a wall of Afghan dust, its twin rotors carving angry spirals in the superheated air. Below forward operating base Scorpion clung to the mountainside like a carbuncle, a cluster of blast walls and weathered tents surrounded by nothing but rock and hostility. The year was 2011. The war was old. The mountains were older still. Two passengers rode in the cargo bay. The first was Sergeant Maya Hendricks, 26 years old, compact and wiry, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of spent brass. She wore her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, tight enough to hurt. Her uniform was standard Army combat, but the drag bag strapped across her back was anything but standard. Inside that reinforced case rested a rifle worth more than most soldiers made in 6 months. Custom-built, hand-fitted, an instrument of surgical precision in a world of blunt force trauma. The second passenger was Chief Warrant Officer Jack Reeves, 58 years old, gray stubble on a weathered face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as these mountains. He carried an older rifle, an M40A3, the finish worn smooth by decades of hard use. His eyes were the pale blue of winter sky, and they missed nothing. The crew chief gave the 30-second warning. Hendricks adjusted her pack, feeling the familiar bite of the straps against her shoulders. 65 pounds of equipment, optics, ammunition, tools, water. The weight was a constant companion, as much a part of her as her own skeleton. Reeves caught her eye across the vibrating cargo bay. He gave a slight nod. No words, none needed. The Chinook touched down in a storm of rotor wash and flying grit. The ramp dropped with a hydraulic groan. Afghanistan rushed in, heat like a physical blow, air so dry it cracked lips and stole moisture from every breath. The smell of dust and diesel fuel and something older, something that had soaked into this soil across millennia of warfare. Hendricks stepped out first. Reeves followed, moving with the careful economy of a man who had learned long ago not to waste energy in a combat zone. 3 Rangers waited near the landing zone. Their uniforms were sun-faded to the color of old bone. Dust covered everything. It got into weapons, into food, into lungs. It was as much a part of Afghanistan as the mountains themselves. The woman in front wore captain's bars, tall, angular, with sharp features and sharper eyes. Her name tape read Vaughn. She did not offer a hand. Sergeant Hendricks. Captain Nora Vaughn's voice was flat, professional, and cold as winter rain. Chief Reeves, welcome to Phobe Scorpion. Behind Vaughn stood 2 men. The first was built like a welterweight boxer, all lean muscle and contained energy. Staff Sergeant Cole Brennan, 30-ish, Iraq War ribbons on his chest. His eyes locked onto Hendricks' drag bag with an expression somewhere between suspicion and contempt. The second man was older, bigger. Master Sergeant Frank Taylor, 40 years old and 200 pounds of solid competence. His face was neutral, professional. A career NCO who had seen enough tours to know when to keep his mouth shut and his opinions private. That's a hell of a case, Brennan said, nodding at the drag bag. Carrying a piano in there. Hendricks met his gaze without blinking. My rifle. Custom rig. The way he said it made it sound like an accusation. Modified M2010, custom barrel and stock. Brennan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He glanced at Taylor, then back at Hendricks. A lot of money in one package. Hope it shoots as good as it keys. Reeves spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of authority earned over decades. Son, I've been shooting longer than you've been breathing. Gear matters, but the shooter matters more. Always has. Brennan stiffened slightly. Something in Reeves' tone and his presence commanded respect despite the age difference. The old man had gravity. Vaughn cut through the tension. Load your gear in the MRAP. We've got a bunk assignment and a range slot in 90 minutes. I want to see what division sent me. The ride to the barracks was short and silent. The MRAP's interior smelled of sweat and gun oil, and the particular staleness of a vehicle that had seen too many patrols through too many hostile valleys. Hendricks sat across from Brennan and Taylor. Neither man spoke, but Brennan kept glancing at her drag bag, his expression unreadable. The barracks tent was exactly what she expected. Rows of cots, footlockers, personal photos taped to plywood walls, the smell of dust and male bodies, and the particular loneliness that comes from being far from home in a place that wants you dead. Her assigned bunk was at the far end, nearest the tent flap, the one that caught the most dust when the wind blew, the one farthest from the small diesel heater that would matter come winter. No one offered to help as she hauled her footlocker inside. She didn't expect them to. Hendricks unpacked with methodical precision. Every item had its place. Sleeping bag, spare uniforms, 3 paperback books, their spines cracked from multiple readings, a small framed photograph that she did not display but kept wrapped in a clean cloth at the bottom of her locker. Then she opened the drag bag. The rifle inside was matte gray, non-reflective, every surface optimized for function over form. The stock was custom-fitted, Macmillan adjustable for length of pull and cheek height. The barrel was a Krieger match-grade hand-lap to tolerances, measured in 10,000ths of an inch. The Schmidt and Bender scope was mounted with a single-piece spur mount, each fastener torqued to exact specifications. She had built this rifle herself, every component chosen, every measurement verified. It was an extension of her own body as familiar as her own heartbeat. Brennan wandered over pretending to look for something in a nearby locker. His eyes kept drifting to the rifle. "What caliber?" he asked. "300 Winchester Magnum." "Hand loads, yes." "What grain?" "Sierra 220 grain, Match King, boat tail hollow point." Brennan nodded slowly. "That's precision ammunition, match grade. What's your powder charge?" 72.5 grains H1000, seeded .010 off of the lands. He stared at her for a long moment. "Then you realize custom loads are a liability in the field. Temperature variations affect burn rate. Altitude affects pressure. If something goes wrong, you can't just grab ammo from supply." Hendricks looked up at him. Her voice was calm, professional, empty of emotion. "I'm aware of the variables. I account for them. In combat, variables kill people. So does missing." Brennan's expression hardened. He walked away without another word. That evening, as the sun turned the Afghan sky the color of a fading bruise, Reeves found Hendricks sitting alone outside the tent. She was cleaning her rifle, each movement precise and ritualistic. The barrel gleamed in the dying light. Reeves sat down beside her. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. Old, faded, protected in a plastic sleeve worn soft with handling. "Your father was Michael Hendricks," Reeves said quietly. "1st Marine Division Scout, Sniper Platoon." Hendricks' hand stopped moving. She looked at the photograph. 2 young men in desert camouflage 20-something years ago. Saudi Arabia, judging by the flat tan landscape behind them. Both held M40 rifles. Both were grinning the reckless grins of young men who had not yet learned what war really cost. One of them had her eyes. "You knew him." It wasn't a question. "We were a spotter team. Desert Storm 1990 and 91. He was the best wind reader I ever saw. Had a gift for it. Could read mirage like most people read books." Hendricks' voice was very quiet. "He never came home." February 26, 1991, Battle of Kuwait International Airport. He was providing overwatch for a Marine rifle company. Took fire from a building complex. Reeves paused. "He didn't make it out." She had known the date her entire life. Had grown up with the knowledge that her father died when she was 6 months old. Too young to remember. Old enough to spend her whole life feeling the absence. "Before that last mission," Reeves continued, "he made me promise something. If anything happened to him, and if he had children who went into the military, I would watch their backs. Keep them safe if I could." He looked at her directly. "I've been tracking your career since you enlisted. National championships at age 23. Youngest woman to graduate Scout, Sniper Basic Course. Expert marksman rating. You didn't just follow in his footsteps, you exceeded them." Hendricks felt something crack inside her chest, a fault line she had spent years reinforcing. "Did he?" She had to stop, swallow, start again. "Did he teach you the wind reading technique? The mirage overlay method?" Reeves smiled, a sad, distant expression. "He invented it. Out in the Saudi desert waiting for the ground war to start. Figured out how to read mirage patterns at multiple distances, overlay them in his mind to build a 3-dimensional map of wind currents. It was genius. Still classified technically. I'm the only other person alive who knows it." "He wrote about it," Hendricks said softly. In his letters and home to my mother. Before I was born, she saved them all. I grew up reading them, trying to understand the technique he was describing. Reeves studied her with new understanding. That's why you shoot the way you do. That's why I'm here. They sat in silence as darkness fell and the mountains turned to black silhouettes against a sky full of stars that looked nothing like the stars back home. The range the next morning was a strip of bulldozed gravel terminating in massive berms of compacted earth. Steel targets hung at measured distances, 300 meters, 500, 800, 1,000, 1,200. The wind came down from the peaks in gusts and eddies, unpredictable and vicious. A sniper's nightmare, or a sniper's proving ground. The entire platoon had turned out to watch. Word had spread. The specialty attachment. The woman with a custom rifle. They wanted to see if she could shoot or if she was just another desk warrior with expensive gear and no fieldcraft. Brennan went first. He set up behind his M11010 a solid semi-automatic platform chambered in 7.62. Standard issue. Reliable. He had used variations of this rifle through 3 deployments in Iraq. It was as much a part of him as his own hands. He settled into position with practiced efficiency, checked his scope, read the wind flags downrange, made his adjustments. The first shot rang out sharp and clean. Through the spotting scope, the observers saw the impact center mass on the 800-meter steel plate. A good hit. 4 more rounds followed in steady succession. When he was done, his group measured 8 inches. Respectable, professional, the kind of shooting that kept people alive in combat. Taylor called it 8-inch group at 800. Nice work, Brennan. Brennan stood dusting off his uniform. He looked satisfied. He should be. It was solid shooting. Then Vaughn's voice cut across the range. Hendricks, you're up. Every eye turned to watch. Hendricks moved to the firing line with unhurried purpose. She set down her drag bag and unzipped it with care. The rifle emerged like a surgeon's instrument from a sterile case. She set up the bipod, unfolded the legs, adjusted the height, settled behind the rifle, and adjusted the cheek rest to bring her eye into perfect alignment with the scope. Then she pulled out a small electronic device, a Kestrel 5700 Elite weather meter. She held it up, letting the wind wash over its sensors. Temperature 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind 12 miles per hour right to left, gusting to 17. Barometric pressure 29.2 inches. Humidity 8%. She entered the data into the ballistic computer on her wrist. The screen glowed with numbers, drop tables, wind drift calculations, Coriolis effect adjustments. But she didn't just trust the numbers. She looked downrange, studying the mirage. Heat waves rose from the baked earth, creating shimmering distortions in the air. To most shooters, mirage was just visual noise. To her, it was information. The mirage near the target ran left to right, tailwind component, but halfway downrange, it boiled straight up. Different wind layer, and near the 400-meter mark, it reversed slightly. A complex, 3-dimensional puzzle of air currents. She closed her eyes, felt the wind on her face, listened to its pitch as it whistled past her ears, built the map in her mind in the way her father had taught through letters written before she was born, refined by Reeves over years of patient instruction. She opened her eyes, made her scope adjustments. 42.3 minutes of angle for elevation, nearly 3 complete rotations of the turret, 2.7 minutes for windage. But she added another half minute, trusting the mirage read over the computer. Then she settled in, controlled her breathing, found the natural respiratory pause between inhale and exhale, the space between heartbeats. The rifle barked. Through the spotting scope, Taylor saw the impact. Dead center. A perfect hit. Hendricks cycled the bolt smoothly. The brass ejected in a lazy arc, glinting in the sun. She chambered another round. Breath. Pause. Press. The second shot landed half an inch from the first. Third shot. Fourth. Fifth. When she cleared her weapon and stepped back, 5 holes clustered in the center of the 1,000-meter plate in a group small enough to cover with a man's fist. Sub 4 inches at 1,000 yards. The silence on the range was absolute. Taylor lowered his spotting scope slowly. That's... He paused, searching for words. That's match-grade precision. Brennan stared at the target through his binoculars. His expression was unreadable. Something between respect and something darker. Fear, maybe, or resentment. Reeves, standing off to the side, allowed himself a small smile. He had seen this before. 23 years ago, a different desert, a different Hendricks, but the same gift. Vaughn approached her, face carefully neutral. "Acceptable performance, Sergeant." Hendricks nodded. "Thank you, ma'am. Tomorrow, 0600, another range session. I want to see consistency." "Yes, ma'am." As the group dispersed, Brennan walked past without a word. But his eyes lingered on the rifle on the impossible group, downrange on this woman who shot like a machine and showed no emotion whatsoever. Later, he found Taylor in the chow tent. "She's good," Taylor said before Brennan could speak. "You've got to give her that." Brennan's jaw was tight. "I've seen good shooters before. Hell, I've served with great shooters. But that kind of precision," he shook his head. "It's all perfect on a range. Controlled environment, known distances. Then combat happens, stress, fear, equipment fails. Imperfect shooters become dead soldiers." Taylor studied his friend. "This about Kowalski." The name hung in the air like smoke. Brennan was quiet for a long time. Then, Fallujah, 2007, Jimmy was 19 years old. Smart kid, quick. He had his whole life ahead of him. "I know. He bought this custom rifle, spent his savings on it, match barrel custom stock, high-end scope, said it would make him a better sniper. We were running Overwatch on a house clearing operation. Jimmy was in position I was spotting. Then his scope mount failed, just sheared right off, screws stripped. He had to take the shot with iron sights, had to expose himself to get the angle." Brennan's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Sniper round caught him in the neck. He bled out in 40 seconds. There was nothing I could do." Taylor put a hand on his shoulder. "That wasn't your fault. His custom gear killed him. If he'd been using standard issue equipment, proper maintenance, he'd still be alive." Brennan's eyes were hard now, certain. "I won't let it happen again. Not in my platoon." "So what are you going to do?" Brennan didn't answer, but the look on his face said enough. The next morning, Hendricks arrived at the range at 0545. Early, always early. She set up her rifle, performed her pre-firing checks. Everything should have been exactly as she left it the previous day. Her zero, the precise point where bullet meet point of aim, should have been unchanged. She fired a confirmation shot at 300 meters. The bullet impacted 6 inches right of center. Hendricks frowned. She fired again. Same result. She cleared her weapon and checked the scope. The windage turret had been moved. 8 clicks to the right, just enough to throw off her zero, just subtle enough that someone might blame it on a bump during transport or a temperature shift overnight. But she knew better. Someone had tampered with her rifle. She said nothing, made no accusation, simply pulled out her small notebook and recorded the adjustment. Then she methodically returned the turret to zero, confirming with 3 careful shots until her point of impact matched her point of aim again. Grant, her assigned spotter, a nervous 21-year-old PFC with eager eyes, watched the process. "Sergeant, that's weird. You sure you didn't bump the—" "I check my zero every morning, Grant. This was intentional. Who would? Doesn't matter. We fix it and move on." She completed her range session with the same mechanical precision as before. Perfect groups, no wasted ammunition, no visible frustration. But she knew what had happened, and she knew it would happen again. The next morning it was worse. The elevation turret had been cranked 15 minutes of angle downward. At distance, that adjustment would cause a complete miss. The bullet would impact yards below the target. Hendricks checked the adjustment, her face a mask of calm professionalism. Grant watched, confused and angry. "This is bullshit, Sergeant. You should report." "No. But someone is sabotaging I know." Her voice was flat, final. "And reporting it accomplishes nothing. My word against theirs. I'm the outsider, the specialty attachment, the one who doesn't belong. An accusation makes me look weak, unable to handle the pressure." She pulled her toolkit from her pack. Inside, nestled in custom foam, were precision instruments, torque wrenches, small screwdrivers, dental picks, and magnifying glasses. The tools of a watchmaker, not a soldier. She disassembled the elevation turret housing in the field. 45 minutes of painstaking work, checking each component, cleaning, retorquing to exact specifications, re-zeroing from scratch. The other Rangers watched from a distance, fascinated despite themselves. It was one thing to adjust a scope. It was another thing entirely to perform field surgery on a $5,000 optic. Reeves approached as she worked. He didn't ask what had happened. He could see it clearly enough. "You know who's doing this," he said quietly. "Yes." "Why not confront him?" Hendricks didn't look up from her work. "My father had a philosophy. He wrote about it in one of his letters. Never defend yourself with words. Let the rifle speak. Competence is the only argument that matters." Reeves smiled slightly. "He did say that, usually right before he made some impossible shot that shut everyone up. Then I'll do the same." The third night of sabotage was more creative. Her ballistic data book vanished from her bunk. This book was irreplaceable. Years of handwritten data. Every shot she had ever fired through this rifle. Environmental conditions, barrel temperature, ammunition, lot numbers, point of impact shifts. It was the accumulated knowledge that made her dangerous. The book reappeared an hour later, tucked under her pillow. Someone had taken it, looked through it, then returned it. The pages were slightly dog-eared now. A clear message. Your secrets aren't safe. Nothing is sacred. That same day, her spotting scope was accidentally knocked over when Brennan walked past her cleaning station. The impact threw off the reticle calibration, not badly, just enough to make it unreliable. She spent the evening recalibrating it using the star focus method, pointing the scope at Polaris, and adjusting the focus until the crosshairs were perfectly crisp against the infinite distance of space. Grant couldn't contain his anger anymore. "Sarge, this is bullshit. You need to say something. Talk to Captain Vaughn. This is deliberate harassment." Hendricks continued working her hands steady and sure. "Focus on learning your job, Grant. Just observe, take notes, study the way wind affects bullet flight. This other stuff, it's just noise, part of the test." "Test, everyone gets tested. The question is whether you pass." But later that night, Taylor found her alone. "I need you to understand something about Brennan," he said without preamble. "Iraq, 2007, Fallujah. He had a spotter, 19-year-old kid named Jimmy Kowalski. Good kid, eager, wanted to be the best." Hendricks set down the rifle component she had been cleaning. She listened. "Jimmy bought custom gear, a rifle built to his specifications. Match barrel competition, trigger high-end optics. He thought it would make him better, and it did on the range. But in combat, the scope mount failed. Manufacturing defect. The screws stripped out under recoil." Taylor's voice was quiet now, heavy with old grief. "Jimmy had to take a critical shot with iron sights. Had to expose himself to get the proper angle. Enemy sniper was waiting. One round. Caught him in the neck. He died in Brennan's arms." The silence stretched between them. "Brennan blames himself," Taylor continued, "and he blames custom gear. In his mind, if Jimmy had used standard issue equipment, properly maintained, and proven reliable, he'd still be alive. So when he sees you with your hand-built rifle and your custom loads and your specialized equipment, he sees Jimmy, and he can't handle it." Hendricks absorbed this information. "I understand, but it doesn't change anything. I still have to prove the rifle works, that the gear is reliable, that I won't get people killed." "That's what I figured you'd say." Taylor almost smiled. "Your father would have said the same thing." "You knew him." "No, but I know the type. Old school snipers. They proved themselves with every trigger pull. Didn't matter what anyone thought. Just mattered what they could do." After he left, Hendricks sat alone in the dim light of a single battery-powered lamp. She thought about Brennan, about a 19-year-old kid bleeding out in Fallujah, about fear and guilt and the desperate need to prevent the same tragedy from happening twice. She understood it, but understanding didn't make the sabotage acceptable, and it didn't change what she had to do. The mission briefing came 3 days later, or 300 hours. The command tent was cold and smelled of stale coffee. Captain Vaughn stood before a portable screen satellite imagery glowing in the darkness. The assembled Rangers sat on folding chairs alert despite the hour. Reeves and Hendricks sat in the back, Grant beside them, notebook ready. Vaughn used a laser pointer to highlight a rugged mountain valley 30 kilometers from the Pakistani border. "This is our target area. Intel confirms that Hamid Ghazi, designated the engineer, will be meeting with 3 foreign explosive suppliers at this location tomorrow at 900 hours. She clicked to the next slide, a photograph of a bearded man in traditional Afghan clothing, hard eyes, the face of someone who had killed before and would kill again without hesitation. Ghazi is responsible for 47 roadside bombs in Ghazni province alone, 214 coalition casualties. He's a high-value target. Priority 1. Another click. The image changed to show a ruined compound in a mountain valley. Old Soviet-era construction mostly collapsed. Perfect for a clandestine meeting. The meeting point is here, Vaughn said, circling the ruins. The suppliers are believed to be Russian or former Soviet bloc. If we can identify them, photograph them, and track their movements, we can potentially dismantle an entire network. She moved the pointer to a knife-edge ridge overlooking the valley. We will establish an observation post here. Tora Ridge, grid reference 42 Kilo Echo. It provides clear line of sight to the target area. Reeves leaned forward slightly. What's the distance, Captain? Vaughn's voice was neutral. 600 meters from the OP to the compound. Someone whistled low, nearly 3 miles. This is strictly ISR, Vaughn continued. Intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. We observe, we document, we do not engage. I repeat, we do not engage. Our mission is to gather intelligence, not to initiate contact. Brennan raised his hand. Captain, with respect, why bring a sniper to an observation mission? Vaughn's eyes were hard. Because if the tactical situation changes, if we are compromised, or if the opportunity presents itself, we need the capability to reach out if necessary. Sergeant Hendricks represents that capability. Brennan's skepticism was obvious. At 600 meters, ma'am, that's not realistic. That's nearly 3 miles. The bullet doesn't have the legs for it. Reeves spoke quietly from the back. Longest confirmed sniper kill on record is 800 meters. Canadian JTF-2 2017. British record before that was 475 meters. Both used 50 caliber rifles. He glanced at Hendrick's rifle case. 300 Winchester Magnum has less range, less energy. At 600 meters, he trailed off, leaving the obvious unsaid. Vaughn cut through the discussion. The mission is observation, period. But if you can't adapt to changing circumstances, you are meeting the wrong line of work. We infiltrate at 2200 hours tomorrow. Insertion by Chinook 8 kilometers out. 4-hour movement to establish OPE before dawn. Questions? There were none. Dismissed. Get some rest. It's a long walk. As the Rangers filed out, Hendricks remained seated. Reeves beside him, both studying the satellite imagery, committing terrain features to memory. That night, Hendricks performed her final pre-mission ritual. She disassembled her rifle completely. Every component laid out on a clean white cloth in precise order. The bolt, the firing pin, the trigger assembly, the barrel, the stock, even the scope came apart, revealing the delicate internal mechanisms that made precision possible. She cleaned each piece with dedicated solvents and brushes, checked tolerances with precision measuring tools, inspected the barrel with a bore scope looking for any sign of throat erosion or carbon buildup. Everything was perfect. Then she began to reassemble, each screw torqued to exact specifications, each component fitted with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. This wasn't just maintenance, it was communion. A conversation between shooter and instrument, conducted in the language of oil and steel. She was nearly finished when she decided to check the scope one final time. She removed the elevation turret cap. Just a routine check, confirming that the internal mechanism had not been disturbed during her cleaning. She tilted the turret housing toward her lamp, and her blood turned to ice. There, wedged deep in the threads between the main screw and the click detent mechanism, was a tiny sliver of brass, almost invisible to the naked eye. A shaving from a shell casing, maybe, or a fragment of scrap metal deliberately inserted. It was small enough not to jam the mechanism completely, but large enough to create inconsistent drag. 3 clicks of adjustment might move the reticle 2.8 minutes, or maybe 3.1 minutes. Unpredictable, unreliable. At close range, that inconsistency would be meaningless, but at extreme distance, it would translate to misses measured in feet. It was the same sabotage that had killed Jimmy Kowalski in Fallujah, the same sabotage that haunted Brennan's nightmares. and someone had put it in her rifle. Her hands shook, not from fear, from pure cold rage. She looked across the tent. Brennan's bunk was empty. He was probably on watch or at the gym, but his footlocker was there. His gear, his presence. Grant slept fitfully nearby, unaware. Hendricks pulled out her toolkit, retrieved a magnetized probe no bigger than a needle. She needed steady hands for this. Surgeon's hands. She guided the probe into the turret mechanism. The space was tight. The brass shaving was lodged firmly. One slip and she could damage the delicate detent mechanism, rendering the scope useless. She touched the probe tip to the shaving. The magnet grabbed it. Slowly, with infinite patience, she extracted it. The brass glinted in her lamplight. Such a tiny thing. Such a catastrophic effect. She set it aside and reassembled the turret. Checked it 3 times. Confirmed the clicks were crisp and consistent again. Then she sat back, staring at that tiny piece of brass. A shadow fell across her workspace. Reeves stood there quiet as a ghost. He had seen everything. "That's what killed Kowalski," he said softly. "I know. Brennan doesn't understand what he's doing. He thinks he's testing your equipment, making sure it won't fail in combat. He doesn't realize he's creating the exact failure he's trying to prevent." Hendricks' voice was flat. "In 6 hours, we infiltrate. If I confront him now, the mission gets scrubbed. Ghazi escapes. More Americans die from his bombs. So what do you do?" She looked at him. Her eyes were hard as stone. "I fix it. I verify my zero before we move out, and I make whatever shot the mission requires. Even if it's impossible. My father made impossible shots." Reeves smiled slightly, sad, proud. Yes, he did. Outside, the Afghan night was cold and clear. Stars blazed in a sky unpolluted by city lights. Somewhere out there in those mountains, a man who had killed 200 Americans was preparing for a meeting that he believed would be safe, protected by distance, by terrain, by the simple physics that said no bullet could reach that far. Hendricks stood in the darkness, feeling the weight of her father's legacy. The weight of Reeves' trust, the weight of the mission, the weight of proving that she belonged here, that she was worthy, that the rifle would speak, and when it did, everyone would listen. Tomorrow would be a long walk into the mountains of Bawans, and whatever waited at the end of that walk, she would be ready. The rifle was clean, the scope was true, the ammunition was perfect. All that remained was the shot, and Sergeant Maya Hendricks had spent her entire life preparing for exactly this moment. The Chinook lifted off at 2200 hours, its rotors beating the night air into submission. Inside the cargo bay, 8 Rangers sat in near total darkness, their night vision goggles transforming the world into shades of green and shadow. The helicopter flew low and fast, hugging the terrain, invisible to radar, and hopefully invisible to the Taliban fighters who controlled these mountains. Hendricks felt the familiar pre-mission calm settle over her. Not peace exactly, more like the stillness of deep water. Her rifle was secured across her chest. Her pack rode heavy on her shoulders. 65 pounds of equipment that would keep her alive and allow her to do her job. The weight was comforting. Weight meant preparation. Weight meant capability. Beside her, Reeves sat with his eyes closed, but she knew he wasn't sleeping. Old soldiers learned to rest without sleep to conserve energy in whatever moments presented themselves. His weathered face was peaceful in the green glow of the night vision world. Across the bay, Brennan checked his rifle for the 3rd time. Nervous energy. His hands moved with practiced precision, but there was tension in his shoulders that spoke of something deeper than pre-mission jitters. Grant, young and eager, kept adjusting his pack straps. First mission as a designated spotter. He wanted desperately to prove himself. Hendricks had seen that look before in every new soldier who had something to prove. She hoped the kid would survive long enough to lose that desperate edge and develop the calm competence that kept people alive. Taylor sat relaxed, the stillness of a career NCO who had done this too many times to count. His eyes were open, watching everything missing, nothing. The crew chief held up 10 fingers. 10 minutes. The Rangers performed final checks. Weapons, ammunition, water, medical supplies. Each man a self-contained unit capable of surviving and fighting independently if the team was scattered. The Chinook flared hard, its nose pitching up as the pilots killed forward momentum. For a moment, they hung suspended in the night sky. Then the wheels touched Afghan soil with a jolt. The ramp dropped. The Rangers flowed out like water spreading into a defensive perimeter around the landing zone. The helicopter was already lifting off its rotor wash, creating a storm of dust and small rocks. Then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness, and the only sound was the wind and the team's controlled breathing. Taylor's voice came through the radio, low and calm. "Security set, begin movement." They moved in single file, spacing themselves at 10-meter intervals. Taylor on point, reading the terrain through his night vision. Vaughn behind him, then Brennan, then two riflemen, whose names Hendricks hadn't yet learned. Hendricks followed with Grant behind her and Reeves bringing up the rear. The climb began immediately. Afghanistan at night was a different world than Afghanistan by day. The brutal heat faded to cold that seeped through clothing and settled into bones. The mountains that looked brown and dead in daylight became black monoliths under starlight, ancient and indifferent to the tiny human figures crawling up their slopes. They climbed in silence, navigating by GPS and terrain features visible through night vision. The route was deliberately indirect, avoiding known trails and settlements. 4 hours to cover 8 kilometers. A pace that would be laughable on flat ground, but was aggressive in this vertical terrain. Hendricks found her rhythm quickly. Step, breathe, step, breathe. The pack straps bit into her shoulders. Her thighs burned. Sweat soaked her uniform despite the cold. She ignored it all. Pain was just data. Discomfort was just noise. The mission was what mattered. Behind her, Grant struggled. She could hear his breathing getting ragged. The kid was fit, had passed all his PT tests with good scores. But there was a difference between fitness and the kind of sustained endurance required for mountain warfare. After an hour, they took their first security halt. The team formed a defensive circle, each ranger facing outward, weapons ready. They drank water and caught their breath, but didn't speak. Reeves moved through the darkness to Grant's position. The kid was bent over, hands on his knees, trying to control his breathing. "Pack too heavy?" Reeves asked quietly. "No, Chief, I'm good." "Sure you are, but let me show you something." Reeves helped Grant redistribute the weight, moving heavier items closer to the spine, adjusting the hip belt to transfer load from shoulders to hips. Small adjustments that made a significant difference. "How'd you learn that?" Grant asked. "Desert Storm. We didn't have the fancy load-bearing gear you kids get now. We humped 80-pound packs with Korean War-era equipment. You learned to distribute weight efficiently, or you didn't make it." Grant was quiet for a moment. "Then, what was it like, the Gulf War?" Reeves glanced at Hendricks, who was pretending not to listen. "Fast. Brutal. We spent months building up in Saudi Arabia, training, waiting. Then the ground war started, and it was over in 100 hours. But those 100 hours, they mattered. You were a sniper. Spotter. My partner was the shooter. Best I ever saw. He could read wind like most people read newspapers." Brennan had drifted closer, ostensibly checking his weapon, but clearly listening. Reeves continued, his voice quiet but carrying in the thin mountain air. "We were providing overwatch for a Marine rifle company outside Kuwait City. Enemy had taken positions in a building complex, pinning our guys down. My partner made a shot at 368 meters. One round. Center mass. Threat eliminated. The Marines got out." 368 meters. Grant breathed. "That's over 3/4 of a mile." It was the longest confirmed kill of the war. They classified the report. "Didn't want enemy forces knowing our capabilities." But everyone who was there knew. The man saved lives that day. Taylor's voice cut through the night. 2 minutes, then we move." They climbed. Second hour, third. The altitude made breathing harder. The air was thin up here, every breath containing less oxygen than the one before. Hendricks' legs were on fire now, but she maintained her pace. Never the fastest, never the slowest, just steady, relentless forward progress. She thought about her father. Wondered if he had climbed mountains like these during Desert Storm. The terrain was different there, mostly flat desert, but there had been operations in the foothills along the Iraq-Saudi border. Had he felt this same burning in his muscles, this same determination to prove himself capable? Halfway through the 4th hour, during another security halt, something shifted in the platoon's dynamic. Vaughn had pushed hard on a steep section, setting a punishing pace. The younger Rangers were struggling. But when they reached the halt point and looked back, they saw Hendricks still moving with that same steady rhythm, as if the weight in altitude and distance meant nothing. And behind her, Reeves, 58 years old, keeping pace without complaint. Taylor caught Vaughn's eye and nodded toward them, a silent acknowledgement. Whatever else these two might be, they were not weak. They were not liabilities. Brennan watched too, his expression unreadable in the green glow of night vision. His certainty was cracking. Just a little. Just enough to let doubt creep in. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten when they reached Tora Ridge. The observation post was nothing more than a knife edge of broken rock jutting out over an impossible drop. On three sides, the mountain fell away into darkness. The only approach was the narrow ridge they had climbed. Tactically, it was perfect for observation and suicide for escape. The valley floor spread out 600 meters below them, a miniature world of rock and dust that would come alive when the sun rose. The Rangers set up their positions with practiced efficiency. Camouflage netting went up first, breaking up their silhouette against the sky, then sleeping mats and equipment arranged to minimize movement and noise. Hendricks and Grant established the primary observation post at the ridge's furthest point. She unpacked her rifle with the care of a surgeon preparing instruments. Every movement was deliberate, economic, nothing wasted. The spotting scope came out next, a massive optic with magnification powerful enough to read license plates at a mile. She mounted it on a small tripod and began scanning the valley below. Through the scope, she could see the target compound. Ancient stone walls half collapsed. Soviet-era construction from the 1980s built during their failed occupation. Now it was just ruins home to scorpions and the occasional shepherd. Perfect for a clandestine meeting, Grant sat up beside her notebook, ready, radio checked and rechecked. The kid was nervous but controlling it well. His hands didn't shake as he prepared his equipment. Reeves positioned himself slightly behind them, his own rifle ready, serving as backup and mentor in equal measure. The sun rose with the usual dramatic speed of high altitudes. One moment darkness, the next golden light washing across the peaks, revealing the valley in sharp detail. And then they waited. Hours crawled past. The sun climbed higher. Temperature soared from freezing to over 100 degrees. The rocks around them baked radiating heat like an oven. Sweat ran freely despite the altitude's dryness. The Rangers lay motionless under their camouflage, enduring. This was the reality of military operations that movies never showed. Not constant action, but long stretches of disciplined stillness. Uncomfortable, boring, necessary. Hendricks remained behind her optics, scanning the valley in methodical patterns, left to right, near to far, looking for any deviation from the baseline she had established at first light. Any movement, any disturbance. Grant logged details in his notebook. Time, temperature, wind direction, building the record that would be analyzed later by intelligence analysts looking for patterns. Around 0830, Grant shifted positions slightly to ease a cramping leg. His hand brushed against Hendricks' rifle stock, and he noticed something he hadn't seen before. With the cheek rest adjusted to its highest position for the extreme downward angle, they might need a section of the stock was visible that was normally hidden. Scratched into the polymer, faded with time and use, were words etched by hand. Whisper, MH 1991. Grant stared at the inscription. The name triggered something in his memory. A story from Scout Sniper Basic. An instructor talking late one night about legendary shots. About a Marine in Desert Storm who... He looked at Hendricks, then at Reeves, then back at the inscription. Chief, he whispered. Was that... Reeves followed his gaze, saw what Grant had discovered. For a moment, something like pain crossed his weathered face. Then pride. Desert Whisper, Reeves said quietly. That was Michael Hendricks' call sign. 1st Marine Division Desert Storm. They called him Whisper because his targets never heard the shot, just dropped where they stood. Taylor, positioned nearby, turned his head. Wait, the Desert Whisper, I read about that in Scout Sniper course. Longest confirmed kill in the Gulf War. The technique was classified. Still is, Reeves confirmed. The Mirage Overlay method, reading heat distortion at multiple distances, building a three-dimensional wind map in your mind. Michael invented it in the Saudi desert waiting for the war to start. Brilliant piece of fieldcraft. Grant's voice was barely audible. But Whisper died. Kuwait 1991. The record said, February 26th. Hendricks said softly, had her eye still pressed to the scope. Battle of Kuwait International Airport. He was providing overwatch for a marine company, took fire from a building. He died covering their extraction. The silence stretched. Taylor spoke carefully. So you're his daughter. Brennan had stopped pretending not to listen. He stared at Hendricks with an expression caught between disbelief and something approaching awe. Grant's mind was racing. The Mirage method. No one else knows it, except the man who spotted for him. Taylor finished looking at Reeves. And the woman he trained, Reeves added, nodding toward Hendricks. The weight of legacy settled over the observation post. This wasn't just some specialty attachment sent by division. This was the daughter of a legend trained by his partner, carrying forward a technique that was literally classified because of how effective it was. Brennan's face had gone pale. He had been sabotaging the rifle of a legend's daughter, a woman who had spent her entire life preparing to honor her father's memory. The weight of what he had done crashed down on him like a physical force. But before anyone could process this revelation further, the valley below erupted into chaos. It was 0847 hours when the first convoy appeared. 3 Toyota Hilux trucks, the universal vehicle of warfare in this region, kicked up dust trails as they converged on the ruined compound. Hendricks adjusted her optics, zooming in on the vehicles. Through the powerful scope, details leaped into sharp focus. The trucks were modified, heavy-duty suspensions, weapon mounts welded into the beds. This wasn't a shepherd moving his flock. This was military movement. The vehicles stopped at the compound. Men dismounted. Hendricks counted them. 12. All armed, AK-47 variants mostly. 2 with what looked like PKM machine guns. Then the target emerged from the lead vehicle. Hamid Ghazi, tall even from this distance. Bearded, gray shalwar kameez. He moved with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. I have positive ID on primary target, Hendricks said into her radio. Her voice was calm, professional, empty of emotion. Ghazi is on site. Vaughn's response came through the earpiece. Copy. Begin documentation. Hendricks activated the camera attached to her scope. High-definition video recording everything. Grant logged details in his notebook. Time, personnel count, vehicle descriptions. The routine intelligence work that might seem boring but could save lives down the line. 3 more vehicles arrived. Different make, different configuration. The foreign suppliers. 3 men stepped out. European features visible even at this distance. They wore civilian clothing but moved like military. Russian likely, or former Soviet bloc. Exactly what intelligence had predicted. The meeting began. Through the scope, Hendricks watched them gather in the shade of a partially collapsed wall. Papers were produced, gestures were made, a transaction was taking place. Weapons, explosives, the tools of terrorism changing hands. Grant's voice was a constant whisper into the radio, relaying information to Vaughn. 4 primary targets confirmed. 3 foreign nationals, positive ID on Ghazi. Meeting in progress. No visible security beyond the immediate protection detail. Everything was going according to plan, and then the world exploded. The first explosion came from the opposite ridge, 2 kilometers across the valley. A streak of fire, a rocket-propelled grenade drawing a line of smoke across the perfect blue sky. The RPG slammed into the compound with a blast that echoed off the mountains like thunder. Rock and dust fountained upward. The assembled men scattered like startled animals. What the hell? Vaughn's voice cracked with tension. Did we fire? Who fired? Negative, negative, Taylor shouted back. That came from the opposite ridge. More explosions followed, multiple RPG launches, machine gun fire, the distinctive chatter of PKM heavy weapons. A full-scale ambush. But not their ambush. A rival Taliban faction had chosen this exact moment to attack Ghazi. They had been tracking him too, waiting for their own opportunity. The valley floor became a war zone. Ghazi's security detail returned fire. Tracers streaked across the open space. The foreign suppliers dove for cover. Complete chaos. Then one of the RPGs went long. Hendricks saw it through her scope. The rocket soared over the compound, its trajectory too high, and she realized with horrible clarity where it was heading. Incoming. She barely got the word out before the world turned to fire and thunder. The RPG impacted the cliff face 30 feet below their position. The explosion was massive, amplified by the confined space of the ridge. The concussive wave was a physical blow, lifting bodies and slamming them against rock. Hendricks flattened herself instinctively, arms covering her head as debris rained down. Rocks, dust, the smell of high explosives. When the ringing in her ears subsided enough to think she heard screaming. "Comms are down," Taylor's voice distant and distorted. "The satellite antenna is gone." Hendricks looked up through the settling dust. The long-range communications antenna, their only link to base to air support to the outside world, was a twisted ruin of metal and melted plastic, half of it blown over the cliff edge. They were cut off. Grant was down, slumped against a boulder. Blood ran from under his helmet. His eyes were open but unfocused. Concussed. Maybe worse. Reeves had thrown himself over Hendricks' rifle during the blast, protecting it with his body. He rolled off, now checking himself for injuries, then immediately moving to check Grant. "Kid's got a concussion," Reeves called out, "bleeding from a scalp laceration. Pupils are reactive. He's alive." Vaughn crawled to their position, her face streaked with dust and blood from a dozen small cuts. "Status, everyone sound off," and the Rangers called in. Brennan was up, rifle ready. Taylor was bleeding from his arm but functional. The two riflemen were shaken but combat capable. Vaughn keyed the radio, trying to reach base. Static. She tried alternate frequencies. Nothing. The blast had taken out their communications completely. "We're on our own," she said, the words heavy with implication. Hendricks returned to her scope, scanning the valley. The firefight below was intensifying, but something else caught her attention. Ghazi. He had been wounded in the initial explosion. She could see blood on his left arm soaking through his clothing, but he was mobile. His security detail was dragging him away from the kill zone, moving with disciplined purpose. They were heading toward a cave system at the north end of the valley. Old Soviet bunkers carved into the mountain. If Ghazi reached those caves, he would disappear into a network that extended for miles. They would never find him. And behind them, spreading out with military precision, his fighters were beginning to sweep the surrounding ridges. Brennan had spotted it too. "Captain, we have a problem. Look at their movement pattern. They're not retreating. They're searching." Taylor raised his binoculars. "Son of a bitch. They think we fired that RPG. They're hunting us." The tactical situation crystallized in an instant. The rival Taliban faction's ambush had been mistaken for an American attack. Ghazi's forces, furious and paranoid, were now sweeping the ridges, looking for the source. And the last RPG had come from their direction. They were trapped. No communications, no air support, enemy forces hunting them. And the only route off this ridge was blocked. Worse, their primary target was escaping. Vaughn crawled to Hendricks' position. Her eyes were hard, her jaw set. The expression of a commander facing an impossible decision. "Hendricks, what's the range to target?" Hendricks already had the rangefinder on Ghazi. The laser gave her an exact measurement. 4,587 meters. "Can you hit him?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Can you hit him at nearly 3 miles? In unpredictable mountain winds, with a moving target, with a caliber not designed for this kind of extreme range? Hendricks's mind ran the numbers automatically. Bullet drop would be over 500 feet. Flight time would be 11 seconds. In those 11 seconds, wind would push the bullet. Gravity would pull it. The Earth's rotation would affect it. 1,000 variables, any one of which could turn a perfect shot into a complete miss. "Captain, that shot is impossible," Brennan said, his voice tight. "The round doesn't have the velocity. It'll be subsonic before it arrives. Tumbling, inaccurate. You might as well throw rocks." Reeves spoke quietly. "The math says he's right. This isn't a .50 caliber. The 300 Win Mag wasn't designed for this range." Vaughn's eyes never left Hendricks. "I didn't ask about the math. I asked if you can hit him." "If we don't stop him," Taylor added. "He disappears. 200 Americans dead from his bombs. Hundreds more will follow." Hendricks looked through her scope at Ghazi being helped across the rocky ground, getting closer to the cave entrance with every second. Once he was inside that system, he was gone forever. She thought about the photograph Reeves had shown her. Her father, young and alive, grinning in the Saudi desert. She thought about the letters he had written, about the technique he had invented, about impossible shots made when everything was on the line. "I'll try," she said. Vaughn nodded once. "Do it." Hendricks settled behind her rifle. began her pre-firing routine, but something was wrong. She pressed her eye to the scope, adjusted the focus, then tested the elevation turret. Click, click, click. The feel was wrong, not crisp, mushy, inconsistent. Her blood went cold. "Stop," she said. Grant, still groggy from his concussion, looked at her with confusion. Reeves saw her expression and understood immediately. Hendricks reached for her toolkit, pulled out a small screwdriver. She removed the turret cap with quick practiced movements. Then the three tiny set screws holding the housing in place. The turret mechanism came free. She tilted it toward the light, and there it was, a brass shaving, tiny, almost invisible, wedged between the threads of the elevation adjustment screw and the spring-loaded detent that created the clicking sensation. At close range, this wouldn't matter. The inconsistency would be too small to notice. But at 4,587 meters, this microscopic piece of debris would create variations that would translate to misses measured in yards. She held up the shaving, her hand rock steady despite the rage burning through her veins. "This is what killed Jimmy Kowalski," she said, her voice flat. Brennan's face drained of all color. He had sabotaged the rifle one final time during the night movement. One last test, one final confirmation that her custom gear wasn't reliable. And now, with enemy forces closing in and lives on the line, he had just ensured that the one shot that might save them all would miss. "Oh God," Brennan whispered. "Oh God, I was just—" Taylor's voice cut through the radio. "Hostiles, 500 meters and closing. They're moving fast." Vaughn turned to Hendricks. "Can you fix it?" 90 seconds. "You've got 60. Hendricks' hands became instruments of precision. No wasted movement. No hesitation. This was what she had trained for her entire life. She pulled out a magnetized probe from her toolkit, a needle-thin piece of steel with a magnetic tip, the kind of tool a watchmaker might use to retrieve a fallen screw from inside a complex mechanism. She guided the probe into the turret housing. The space was tight. The brass shaving was wedged firmly. If she slipped, if she damaged the internal components, the scope would be useless. Behind her, she could hear gunfire. Brennan and Taylor engaging the advancing enemy, trying to buy her time. Grant, despite his concussion, held her toolkit ready to hand her whatever she needed. Reeves knelt beside her, calm as deep water. "Just like we practiced. Steady. You've got this." The probe tip touched the brass shaving. The magnet grabbed it. She could feel the resistance as the metal fragment released from where it had been wedged. Slowly, carefully, she withdrew the probe. The brass shaving emerged glinting in the harsh Afghan sun. Such a tiny thing, such catastrophic consequences. She set it aside, began reassembling the turret. Each screw had to be seated perfectly, each component aligned. This wasn't something she could rush. 300 meters, Taylor's voice was urgent. "They're bounding my teams. These guys are trained." Vaughn positioned herself next to Hendricks, pistol drawn. "Whatever happens, you take that shot. We'll handle the rest." Hendricks replaced the set screws, torqued them by feel, by memory. Years of practice allowing her hands to know exactly how tight was tight enough without stripping the threads. The turret cap snapped back into place. She tested it. Click, click, click. Perfect. Crisp, consistent. 200 meters. She swung the rifle back toward the valley. Ghazi was 15 seconds from the cave entrance. This was her window. Her only chance. Brennan had abandoned his position, moved to directly between her and the approaching enemy. He was firing controlled bursts, his rifle barking steadily, drawing fire, buying seconds. "I'll cover you," he shouted back. "Take the shot. I'll make this right." Taylor joined him. The two of them forming a shield with their bodies and their weapons. Hendricks blocked it all out. The gunfire, the shouting, the fear. All of it faded away, leaving only her rifle, and the impossible mathematics of the shot. She pulled out her Kestrel weather meter. The wind had shifted since she last checked, now reading 15 miles per hour, gusting to 22. Variable direction, the worst possible conditions. Her ballistic computer gave her a solution. 1,508 clicks of elevation, 140 mils of windage. But the computer couldn't see what she could see. The dust devil spinning near the target indicating an updraft. The Mirage running left to right at 2,000 meters. but reversing at 3,500. The complex, three-dimensional puzzle of air currents that her father had taught her to read through letters written before she was born. She dialed in the elevation. Click after click after click. Her entire turret range. Twice. Then windage. Computer said 140, but she saw the dust patterns, felt the wind on her face, heard its pitch. She added 6 more mils, then another half, trusting instinct over mathematics. 100 meters. Brennan's voice was ragged now. Do it. Take the shot. Reeves was beside her, not speaking, just present, the way her father would have been if he had lived. Through the scope, she found Ghazi. He was being dragged between 2 boulders that marked the cave entrance. 3 more steps, and he would disappear forever. Hendricks controlled her breathing. Inhale, exhale, found the natural respiratory pause. The space between heartbeats where the body was still, where the rifle was an extension of her will, rather than a separate object. The reticle settled on the gap between Ghazi's head and his bodyguard's shoulder. A 3-second window. Vaughn's voice quiet now, almost gentle. Whisper's legacy. Make it count. Hendricks felt her father's presence, felt the weight of his sacrifice, felt the technique he had invented flowing through her mind like muscle memory written into her DNA. Her finger touched the trigger. 2 pounds of pressure, then 3, then 3.5. The trigger broke like glass. The rifle pushed back into her shoulder. Recoil, immediate and familiar. The suppressor tamed most of the sound, but the concussive force was still massive. The bullet was gone, traveling at 2,850 feet per second initially, but slowing immediately against air resistance, beginning the long, arcing flight that would either end in history or ignominious failure in the Afghan dirt. Hendricks had already cycled the bolt, chambered another round, returned to the scope, professional to the core, one shot but ready for a follow-up that physics said would be even more impossible than the first. Through the powerful optics she watched, the world narrowed to that single point in the valley of 587 meters away. 1 second, 2, 3. Reeves watched through the spotting scope, his weathered hands rock steady. 4, 5, 6. The bullet was at apogee now, the highest point of its arc, beginning the long descent. 7, 8, 9. Brennan had stopped firing. Everyone on the ridge who could spare attention was watching, waiting. 10, 11, and then through the crystal clear optics they saw it. A pink mist, brief, unmistakable. Hamid Ghazi jerked as if struck by lightning. His body went rigid, then slack. He collapsed between his guards like a puppet with its strings cut. The bodyguards froze, confused, looking around wildly, trying to understand where death had come from, how a bullet could reach them from impossible distance. They couldn't know that 4,587 meters away on a ridge, they couldn't even see a woman had just made the longest confirmed sniper kill in military history. 3 full seconds of absolute silence on Tora Ridge. Then Taylor's voice cracked with disbelief. Holy Mother of Ah! Hendricks did not celebrate, did not move, did not react in any visible way. She simply cycled the bolt with the smooth mechanical precision of a machine ejecting the spent brass in a lazy arc that glinted once in the sun before disappearing into the rocks. The fresh round chambered with a solid click. She returned her eye to the scope, maintaining overwatch as if she had just fired a routine training shot instead of making history. But through the optic, she watched the chaos she had created spread across the valley floor like ripples in water. Ghazi's bodyguards scattered, not retreating, panicking. They fired wildly in all directions, their discipline shattered by the impossible shot. How could death reach them from so far away? Where had it come from? The psychological impact was devastating. They were shooting at ghosts, at mountains, at the sky itself. The rival Taliban faction, seeing their enemy in complete disarray, pressed their attack. More gunfire echoed through the valley, but it was already over. Without Ghazi's leadership, without his tactical mind, the meeting had collapsed into a chaotic rout. Brennan lowered his rifle slowly, his face a mask of absolute awe. His mouth worked, but no sound came out. He looked from the valley to Hendricks, to Reeves, and back again, trying to process what he had just witnessed. Grant, despite his concussion, had managed to activate the camera on the spotting scope. He had captured it, the entire shot sequence, the impact, the confirmation. Evidence that would be classified immediately, but would exist nonetheless in some vault, proof that physics could be bent by skill and will in perfect execution. Reeves sat back from his own scope. His hands were shaking slightly, now the adrenaline finally catching up to decades of training that kept emotion locked down during the critical moments. He looked at Hendricks with an expression that mixed pride and grief and something approaching reverence. "Your father," he said quietly. "Michael would have been so damn proud." Hendricks finally pulled away from the scope. She looked at him, and for just a moment, her professional mask cracked. A single tear tracked down through the dust on her cheek. "I did it for him," she said, "for the 200 Americans Ghazi killed, and for proving that his technique works, that his legacy matters." Taylor crawled over his arms, still bleeding, but forgotten in the moment. "Sergeant Hendricks, that was—" He stopped, searching for words inadequate to the moment. "That was the most incredible piece of marksmanship I've ever seen. Ever." Vaughn's voice cut through, bringing them back to immediate reality. "Congratulations can wait. We still have hostiles closing on our position. Ghazi's dead, but his fighters don't know that yet, and we're still cut off with no comms." As if to emphasize her point, bullets cracked overhead. The approaching Taliban fighters were in range now, laying down suppressive fire as they bounded up the mountain. Brennan snapped back into combat mode. He moved to a defensive position, rifle up, engaging targets. But something was different now. He wasn't just fighting, he was protecting. Specifically protecting Hendricks, putting himself between her and the threat. The guilt of what he had done, the sabotage that nearly cost them everything, was written across his face in deep lines. He needed to make it right. And in the only language that mattered in combat, he was doing exactly that. "Range to nearest hostile," Vaughn demanded. 250 meters, Taylor called back. 3 separate elements bounding by fire teams. These guys know what they're doing. Hendricks was already back on her rifle, but now she was using it for a different purpose. Not the impossible long-range shot, but precision, suppressive fire, controlling the battlefield with surgical placement of rounds. She found her first target through the scope, a fighter trying to establish a machine gun position behind a boulder. She didn't aim for the man, she aimed for the rock 6 inches from his head. The bullet impacted with a crack in a spray of stone fragments. The fighter jerked back, abandoning his position, scrambling for better cover. "Shifting fire," she said calmly, and found another target, another carefully placed round that didn't kill, but controlled, hurting the enemy, making them reconsider every advance, slowing their momentum. Reeves watched her work with professional appreciation. Controlled aggression. You're not just shooting, you're conducting. Another round, another fighter forced to seek cover. The advancing elements were slowing, their confidence eroded by precision fire that seemed to anticipate their every move. But there were too many of them, and the Rangers were running low on ammunition. Vaughn made the decision. "We can't hold this position. Prepare to break contact. Bounding overwatch, standard drill. Brennan and Taylor, your first element. Hendricks provides cover. On my mark." They executed the tactical retreat with the precision of professionals who had trained together for exactly this scenario. Even though Hendricks was new to the platoon, the fundamentals were universal. Move, shoot, communicate. Brennan and Taylor fell back 50 meters, while Hendricks and the rifleman maintained fire. Then roles reversed. The rifleman moved while Brennan and Taylor covered. Hendricks' role was unique. With her magnified optic and precision rifle, she could engage threats at ranges where the others' carbines were less effective. She became the shepherd protecting the flock as they withdrew down the mountain. A Taliban fighter appeared on a ridgeline 400 meters out, RPG on his shoulder. Hendricks saw him through her scope, watched him kneel, begin to aim. She put a round through the rock next to him. The fighter flinched, lost his aim, scrambled away. The RPG never launched. "Good shot," Reeves said, having spotted for her. 11 o'clock, 600 meters, 2 fighters moving to flank. Hendricks found them, placed a round between them. Both dove for cover, their flanking maneuver disrupted. The retreat continued. 100-meter bounds, controlled fire, disciplined movement. But the enemy was persistent. They knew someone important had been killed. They wanted revenge. Then Hendricks saw the real threat. A machine gun team was establishing position on a ridgeline that would cut off their escape route entirely. Heavy PKM machine gun. Perfect fields of fire. If that gun got into action, the Rangers would be trapped in a killing zone. "Captain," Hendricks called, "we have a problem. Machine gun nest establishing at our 10 o'clock 700 meters. They're about to control our only exit." Vaughn saw it too. Her face went hard. "We can't reach them with carbines at that range, and we don't have time to maneuver." Brennan looked at the position, looked at the team's tactical situation, and made a decision. "I got this," he said. Before anyone could stop him, he was up and moving. Not away from the threat, toward it. He charged across open ground, his M4 carbine barking in controlled bursts, drawing fire, deliberately making himself a target to pull attention away from the team. "Brennan, what the hell are you doing?" Vaughn shouted. But Brennan wasn't listening. He was running, firing, moving with the reckless courage of a man who had something to prove. Rounds cracked around him. Dust kicked up from near misses. But he kept going. He covered the impossible distance in a full sprint. 50 meters, 75, 100. The machine gun crew saw him coming, tried to traverse their weapon to engage. Too slow. Brennan reached grenade range, pulled 2 fragmentary grenades from his vest, threw them in quick succession with the form of a man who had done this before in the streets of Fallujah. The explosions were sharp and final. The machine gun fell silent. Brennan collapsed behind cover, his chest heaving. Blood soaked through his uniform in 3 places. Shrapnel wounds, not immediately fatal, but serious. Taylor was already moving to retrieve him. "Cover me," he shouted, and sprinted toward Brennan's position. Hendricks provided precision fire, every shot placed exactly where it needed to be. Not killing indiscriminately, but controlling the battlefield with the kind of surgical precision that forced the enemy to keep their heads down. Taylor reached Brennan, grabbed him, started dragging him back toward the team. A Taliban fighter rose from cover rifle aimed at Taylor's exposed back. Hendricks saw him, adjusted, fired. The fighter dropped. This time her round had found flesh. Center mass, necessary, final. Taylor got Brennan to cover, immediately started trauma care. Pressure bandages, quick clot powder. The emergency medicine that kept soldiers alive long enough to reach real medical facilities. Brennan's eyes found Hendricks through the pain. "I'm sorry," he gasped. "Jimmy, I was trying to protect everyone, but I almost killed you all." Hendricks moved to his side. Her voice was firm but not unkind. "You just charged a machine gun nest to save the team. You redeemed yourself 10 times over." "Jimmy would have liked you," Brennan said, his voice fading. "He would have been honored to serve with you." "I would have been honored to serve with him." The sound of rotors cut through the chaos, distant but growing louder. Vaughn looked up. "Apaches. The QRF must have launched when we missed our scheduled comms check." 2 attack helicopters appeared over the ridgeline, their profiles aggressive and lethal. They swept the valley, their sensors identifying hostile forces in friendly IFF transponders. Then Chinooks followed, coming in fast and low. The cavalry had arrived. The Apaches laid down suppressive fire, their 30mm cannons turning enemy positions into clouds of dust and debris. The psychological effect was immediate. The Taliban fighters broke contact, melting back into the mountains. The Chinooks flared hard, touching down just long enough for the Rangers to sprint aboard. Taylor and Reeves carried Brennan between them. Hendricks ran last, her rifle secured across her chest, providing rear security until the ramp came up. Then they were airborne, the mountain falling away beneath them, the immediate danger receding with every second of altitude gained. Inside the cargo bay, the team collapsed. Adrenaline crash. The shakes that come when the body finally admits how close to death it has been. The crew chief moved among them, checking for injuries, distributing water, calling medical status to the pilots. Grant sat with his head between his knees, fighting nausea from his concussion. But he was alive. They were all alive. Brennan lay on a stretcher, medics working on him. His wounds were serious but not critical. He would live. He would carry scars, physical and psychological, but he would survive. He kept looking at Hendricks with an expression that mixed shame and gratitude and respect so profound it bordered on worship. The flight back to Phobos Scorpion took 40 minutes. Long enough for the reality of what had happened to begin settling in. Long enough for the team to sit in profound, exhausted silence. Hendricks sat by the open crew door, watching the Afghan landscape rush past below. Her rifle lay across her lap. She felt empty, not triumphant, not victorious, just empty the way a vessel feels when it has been completely drained. Reeves sat beside her. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. His presence was enough. The fob appeared on the horizon. Dust, blast walls, the organized chaos of a forward operating base. The Chinook touched down. Medical personnel rushed forward with a stretcher for Brennan. The Rangers dismounted, moving like old men, every muscle screaming, every joint stiff. Vaughn assembled them in formation. Shower, chow, then mandatory rest. Debriefing is at 1800 hours. That's an order. The debriefing took place in the battalion commander's office. A small Spartan room with maps on the walls and the pervasive smell of coffee and dust. Colonel James Hayes sat behind a battered desk. 55 years old, gray hair cut high and tight, Desert Storm ribbon on his chest among many others. A man who had seen enough combat to recognize the real thing when he heard about it. Vaughn stood at attention, delivering her after-action report with military precision. At 0847 hours, primary target Hamid Ghazi arrived at the designated location. At 0903, an unknown hostile force initiated an ambush. The engagement was not coordinated with our operation. At 0908, our position was struck by indirect fire, destroying our primary communications capability. She continued, her voice never wavering. With comms down and enemy forces converging on our position, the tactical situation deteriorated rapidly. The primary target attempted to escape to a cave system that would have made recovery impossible. At 0917 hours, I made the decision to engage. Hayes looked up from the report. Distance, 4587 meters, sir. The colonel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Continue. Sergeant Hendricks neutralized the target with a single round. We then broke contact under fire and exfiltrated to emergency pickup coordinates. QRF extracted us at 10:23 hours. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked directly at Hendricks. Sergeant, 4587 meters. That's 2.8 miles in mountain winds, at a moving target. Yes, sir. The longest confirmed sniper kill on record is 2800 meters. You just nearly doubled it. I was trained by Chief Reeves, sir, and my father developed the technique I used. Hayes glanced at Reeves, then back at Hendricks. His voice softened slightly. Your father was Michael Hendricks, Desert Whisper, 1st Marine Division. Yes, sir. The colonel stood, walked to a map on the wall showing the region. I was a lieutenant during Desert Storm. I heard the stories about Whisper, about impossible shots made with iron sights and willpower. I thought they were exaggerated, war stories that grew in the telling. He turned back to face them. This shot will be classified. You understand that the record will show that Ghazi was killed by an airstrike. The actual method will be buried so deep that it will never see daylight. I understand, sir. You won't get a medal that anyone will know about. Won't get recognition. Your name won't appear in any history book. Hendricks stood straighter. I didn't do it for recognition, sir. I did it for the 200 Americans Ghazi killed, and for my father's legacy. Hayes studied her for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He came to attention and saluted. Sergeant Hendricks, you are a credit to your father's memory, to this regiment, and to the United States Army. Dismissed. Hendricks returned the salute, her throat tight with emotion she couldn't allow herself to show. Outside the office, Reeves was waiting. How'd it go? Classified, buried, like it never happened. Your father's shot was classified too. Didn't make it any less real. The people who matter know. That's what counts. That evening, Hendricks visited the medical tent where Brennan was recovering. His arm was bandaged, his torso wrapped. Shrapnel had been removed from 3 locations. He would have scars, but he would heal. He tried to sit up when she entered. She waved him back down. Don't. You're hurt. I need to say this. His voice was hoarse. I sabotaged your rifle. Multiple times. I put that brass shaving in the turret that almost caused you to miss. I almost got everyone killed because I was... He stopped, struggling with the words. Because I was scared. Scared of losing someone else the way I lost Jimmy. Hendricks pulled up a chair, sat beside the bed. Taylor told me about Kowalski. I'm sorry. That kind of loss, it changes you. He was 19, had his whole life ahead of him, and he died because his custom gear failed. So when I saw you with your hand-built rifle and specialized equipment, all I could think was that it was going to happen again. that your fancy gun would fail and someone would die. So you tested it by sabotaging it. I know how insane that sounds. I was creating the exact failure I was trying to prevent. He looked at her directly. But today you made an impossible shot with equipment I had sabotaged. You proved that skill matters more than gear, that a master craftsman with the right tools is unstoppable. He paused. And then I tried to make it right, charge that machine gun position. Not smart, but necessary, Hendricks finished. You drew fire, eliminated a threat, gave the team time to escape. That's what matters. Can you forgive me? Hendricks extended her hand. Already done. You're one of us. You made a mistake, and you paid for it with your blood. In my book, that squares the account. Brennan gripped her hand. His eyes were wet. Jimmy would have liked you. He would have been honored to serve with someone like you. And I would have been honored to serve with him. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that exists between soldiers who have seen the elephant together and survived. Finally, Hendricks stood. Get some rest. We'll need you back on your feet soon. Sergeant, that shot, how did you know? How did you read the wind at that distance? She smiled slightly. My father invented a technique, mirage overlay method. You read heat distortion at multiple distances, overlay them in your mind, build a three-dimensional wind map. Reeves taught it to me. That's genius. That's legacy. Passed down, honored, continued. She left him to rest. The armory was quiet that night, a small caged area within a larger warehouse lit by a single bare bulb that cast long shadows. The air smelled of gun oil and cold metal and the particular quiet that comes when the day's violence has finally ended. Hendricks sat at a long workbench, her rifle completely disassembled before her. Every component laid out in perfect order on a clean white cloth. This was her ritual, her meditation, the way she processed what had happened and restored order to her universe. She cleaned each piece with dedicated solvents and soft cloths, the bolt carrier group, the trigger assembly, the barrel which she examined with almost maternal care, looking for any sign of wear or stress. The brass shaving that had nearly cost them everything sat in a small evidence bag. She had kept it, a reminder of sabotage, of redemption, of how tiny things can have massive consequences. The door opened quietly. Reeves stood there, silhouetted against the brighter warehouse lights. He entered carrying something wrapped in dark cloth. He sat down across from her, setting the bundle on the bench between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply sat in companionable silence, two soldiers at the end of a very long day. Finally, Reeves unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a rifle scope. Not modern, an older model, battered. The finish worn smooth in places, but clearly well-maintained, functional, cherished. Your father gave me this, Reeves said quietly. March 1991, the day before the ground war started. We were in Saudi Arabia waiting for the order to cross into Kuwait. He handed it to me and said, if I don't come back, keep this, and someday give it to someone worthy, someone who understands that legacy isn't about what you leave behind. It's about what you give forward. He pushed the scope across the table toward Hendricks. I've carried this for 23 years, waiting. I tracked your career from the moment you enlisted, watched you grow into an incredible shooter, waited for the right moment to give you this. Hendricks picked up the scope. It was heavier than modern optics. The glass was old but still clear. She could see scratches on the housing, evidence of use, of combat, of a life lived at the edge of possibility. This was on his rifle in Desert Storm. When he made the 368-meter shot that saved those Marines, yes, he was looking through this glass when he pulled that trigger. She ran her fingers over the worn metal, feeling the connection across decades. Her father's hands had held this. His eye had pressed against this eyepiece. His skill had transformed this tool into an instrument of life-saving precision. Today, Reeves continued, you exceeded his record by more than 3,000 meters, using the technique he invented, refined by my spotting, executed with your skill. 3 generations of snipers in one shot. His voice grew thick with emotion. Your father would be so damn proud, not just of the shot, of who you are, of the professional you've become, of the legacy you're carrying forward. Hendricks felt something break inside her chest. The wall she had built, the professional distance, the armor that let her function in this world of violence and death. She set down the scope carefully, and then she did something she almost never did. She cried, not sobbing, not dramatic, just quiet tears that tracked down her face while her shoulders shook with the weight of a lifetime spent trying to honor a father she never knew. Reeves stood, walked around the table, put his arms around her in a fierce embrace. "You did good, kid," he whispered. "You did so damn good." They stood like that for a long time. A father figure in the daughter he had promised to protect. Connected by a man who died 23 years ago, but whose influence still shaped the world in ways no one would ever fully know. Finally, Hendricks pulled back, wiped her eyes, took a deep breath. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for training me, for watching over me, for giving me this. It was always yours. I was just the custodian until you were ready." She looked at her modern rifle disassembled on the bench, then at her father's scope, old and new, past and present. Legacy continued. "I'll mount it on a display rifle," she said. "Keep it safe. Honor it." He'd like that. They spent the next hour together reassembling her rifle, Reeves offering tips from decades of experience, Hendricks absorbing knowledge like a sponge, the ritual of student and teacher, of wisdom passed down. When the rifle was whole again, she performed a function check. The bolt cycled smoothly. The trigger broke crisp and clean, every component working in perfect harmony. Click, snap, whir. The sounds of precision, of craftsmanship, of a warrior's instrument prepared for whatever came next. 3 months later, Fort Benning, Georgia. The Advanced Sniper Course classroom was filled with 30 students, all of them experienced shooters selected for advanced training. The best of the best gathered to learn from masters. Chief Warrant Officer Jack Reeves stood at the front of the room. Retired now from active duty, but serving as a civilian instructor, teaching the next generation, passing the knowledge forward. "Today we're going to discuss wind reading at extreme distances," he began, specifically a technique developed during Desert Storm by a Marine Scout sniper named Michael Hendricks. He clicked a remote. A photograph appeared on the screen. A woman on a mountain ridge rifle shouldered scanning a valley below through powerful optics. Several students recognized the background. Afghanistan, recent, but the woman's face was pixelated, classified. This technique, called Mirage Overlay Method, allows a shooter to read heat distortion at multiple distances and build a three-dimensional wind map in their mind. It's classified. I'm authorized to teach you the fundamentals, but not the specific application that enabled the longest shot in military history. A hand went up. Private First Class Tyler Grant recovered from his concussion and now attending the course he had nearly died before seeing. "Chief, will we ever know the details of that shot?" Reeves smiled. "Some shots are made for history, some are made for the mission. The latter matters more. But I can tell you this, the shooter was trained using Michael Hendricks' technique. The shot was made under combat conditions, against a high-value target, at a distance that physics says should be impossible." He paused. "But impossible is just a word. With the right training, the right mindset, and the absolute refusal to quit, you can achieve things that others will say can't be done." The class absorbed this. These were men and women who had already proven themselves in combat, but they were here to learn, to become better, to carry the legacy forward. After class, Grant approached Reeves. "Chief, I was there. I saw Sergeant Hendricks make that shot. I'll never forget it." "Good. Don't. Let it inspire you, push you to be better." "Will she ever get recognition?" "She already has, from the people who matter, from her team, from her father's memory. That's worth more than any medal." 1 week later, Arlington National Cemetery, Section 60, where the fallen from recent conflicts rested. But Hendricks wasn't here for them. She walked through older sections, rows of white headstones stretching in perfect alignment, each one representing a life given in service, a family forever incomplete. She found the stone she was looking for. Michael J. Hendricks, Sergeant USMC, Desert Storm, Key A, 26 Feb. 1991. Beloved husband and father, fresh flowers already sat at the base. Her mother visited regularly, keeping the memory alive. Hendricks knelt, set down her own offering. Her father's old scope mounted now on a wooden display stand with a brass plaque that read, "Desert Whisper, 1 was 368 men, Kuwait, 1991. She sat cross-legged on the grass, spoke quietly as if he could hear. I did it, Dad. 4,587 meters. I used your technique, the mirage overlay method. Reeves spotted for me just like he spotted for you, and we made history. A breeze moved through the cemetery. The flags on nearby graves rippled. They classified it, just like they classified yours. Nobody will know. But that's okay. You taught me that it's not about glory, it's about the mission, about protecting the people who depend on you. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Reeves gave me your scope. I'm keeping it safe, honoring it. And someday when I find someone worthy, I'll pass it forward. Because that's what legacy means. Not what you leave behind, what you give forward. Footsteps on the grass behind her. She didn't turn, knew who it was. Reeves sat beside her. Together, they looked at the headstone. He's proud of you, Reeves said. I know because I'm proud of you, and I knew him better than anyone. Thank you for keeping your promise, for watching over me, for teaching me. It was my honor. Michael gave me purpose after the war. You gave me purpose before peace. That's what legacy does. It connects us across time, makes us part of something bigger than ourselves. They sat in silence as the sun moved across the sky. Two warriors, two generations, connected by a third who existed now only in memory and in the skills he had passed down. Finally, Hendrik stood, came to attention, saluted the grave with precision and respect. Then she and Reeves walked away together, leaving the scope as a permanent offering, a symbol, a promise kept. Behind them, the inscription on the wooden stand caught the afternoon light, Desert Whisper, 1368 Meter, Kuwait, 1991. And etched below in smaller letters that only someone looking closely would see, Legacy 4587, Afghanistan 2011. For Dad. The story ended where it began, with a rifle, with a shot, with a legacy passed from father to daughter across the gap of death and time. In a warehouse at Fort Benning, Maya Hendricks stood before a new class of students, teaching now, passing knowledge forward. She held up a rifle pointed to its stock. This rifle belonged to my father. He was killed in Desert Storm before I was born. But he left behind something more valuable than life. He left a technique, a way of seeing the world that transforms impossible into achievable. The students leaned forward, hungry for knowledge. Today I'm going to teach you the mirage overlay method, not because you need it to be good, but because to be great you need to stand on the shoulders of those who came before. She began the lesson, her voice steady, her knowledge deep, her father's legacy alive in every word. Outside, the sun set over Fort Benning. Somewhere in Afghanistan, Rangers conducted operations in mountains that would never forget what happened on Tora Ridge. And in a classified file buried in a vault that would never be opened, footage existed of a single bullet's 11-second flight. A pink mist, a target down, the longest shot in history, made by a woman who learned from her father's ghost and a man who kept a promise. Legacy continued.